My son-in-law's family left my daughter stranded on a mountain road during a blizzard. When I found her nearly frozen to death, they just laughed and said she was being dramatic. As the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, I called my younger brother and whispered, "They're heading back to Calgary now. Do what you do best." Before we begin, if you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to Shattered Vengeance and like this video. Write in the comments what province or territory you're watching from. I'm always curious to know where our community is listening. Enjoy the story. The wind that evening in the Rockies carried more than snow. It carried a warning I should have heeded years ago. I stood on the deck of the Harrington family's massive ski chalet near Canmore, watching my daughter Emily move around the great room like a servant in her own marriage. She poured single malt for her husband Marcus and his father Victor, laughing at their crude jokes about city people who couldn't handle mountain weather. Her laughter sounded hollow, rehearsed, like a child reciting lines she'd memorized to avoid punishment. I'm Robert Chen, 65 years old, retired history teacher from Edmonton, widower for 12 years. And that night, I was about to become something I never imagined I could be. The Harrington Chalet was obscene in its grandeur. A sprawling timber frame mansion that clung to the mountainside like a monument to excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Bow Valley, and everything inside screamed of money spent without taste. Mounted elk heads stared down with glass eyes. A stone fireplace large enough to park a truck dominated one wall. The furniture was leather and chrome, cold and unwelcoming, much like the family that owned it. I only came to these gatherings for Emily. Every time she'd convince me with the same words. "Dad, please come. Victor wants the whole family together. It matters to Marcus." I knew it mattered to her. She desperately wanted to believe she'd married into a real family, not this collection of predators in expensive sweaters. But looking at Victor's self-satisfied smirk and Marcus's perpetually mocking eyes, all I saw was a gilded cage. Victor and Marcus had been drinking heavily since noon. Their usual veneer of civility had worn away, revealing the cruelty underneath. They spoke loudly, gestured wildly, and every movement radiated entitlement. They owned this mountain, this valley, this province, or so they believed. And Emily was just another acquisition, a pretty trophy from Edmonton who should be grateful they'd elevated her. "Why is our little city girl Emily bundled up like an Inuit?" Victor bellowed, fixing my daughter with a heavy stare. She wore a thick parka and snow pants, sensible clothing for the weather advisory that had been issued that morning. "Just being cautious, Mr. Harrington," Emily said with a nervous smile. "The forecast said the storm is getting worse." "Worse?" Marcus scoffed, mimicking his father's dismissive tone. "Back in my grandfather's day, people drove these roads in Model Ts. This generation is soft, scared of a little snow." I felt a cold dread settling in my chest. I didn't like where this conversation was heading. It felt like watching someone sharpen a knife, slow and deliberate, full of anticipation. "Leave her alone," I said quietly, but loud enough for them to hear. My voice sounded foreign in that room, like the creak of an old floorboard in a new house. Marcus turned to me with a malicious spark in his eyes. He'd always resented my presence, viewed me as an inconvenient reminder that Emily had a life before him. "Robert, relax. We're just having some fun. Right, sweetheart?" He winked at my daughter. Emily nodded, forcing another smile. "Of course, Dad. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. I saw Marcus and his father exchange a look. Their special look. Predatory, conspiratorial. It was how wolves look at prey before they strike. "You know what would be fun?" Victor suddenly announced, rising from his leather armchair. His massive frame cast a long shadow across the hardwood floor. "Let's see if Emily can handle a real Canadian winter. Marcus, get the keys to the old pickup." "What are you doing?" I stood up too, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We're going to take Emily for a little drive up to the Johnston Canyon lookout. See if she can find her way back. Call it a wilderness orientation." Victor laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "The roads are closed," I said firmly. "Parks Canada issued a warning. There's a blizzard coming." "Roads are suggestions, Robert, not rules. Not for us." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Besides, it's only 20 kilometers. She'll be fine." She's always saying she wants to be more outdoorsy. They grabbed Emily by the arms before I could react. She gasped in surprise, more from shock than fear. She still thought it was a joke, a twisted game. "Marcus, stop! Victor, let me go," she stammered, trying to pull away, but her protests dissolved into nervous laughter. She didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want to appear weak or dramatic. They dragged her toward the garage. I followed, my bad knee screaming in protest. "Stop this right now! You're drunk. You don't know what you're doing." They ignored me completely. I was invisible to them, an annoying buzzing in the background. They shoved her into the passenger seat of an old Ford pickup, the kind with no four-wheel drive and bald tires. Marcus climbed behind the wheel, Victor rode shotgun, and they roared out of the garage before I could reach the door handle. I stood in the driveway, snow already accumulating on my shoulders, and watched the taillights disappear up the mountain road. They were gone for 45 minutes. I spent every second of it pacing the chalet, calling Emily's phone, calling Marcus's phone, getting nothing but voicemail. The storm was building. Through the windows, I could see the snow intensifying, the wind howling through the pine trees. When I heard the truck return, I rushed to the garage. Marcus and Victor stumbled out, laughing, slapping each other on the back. "Where is she?" I demanded. "Where's Emily?" Victor wiped tears of laughter from his eyes. "We left her at the fork about 15K up. She can walk back. It'll toughen her up." The blood drained from my face. "You left her? In this storm? She'll freeze to death." "Oh, calm down, Robert." Marcus waved dismissively, already heading for the whiskey decanter. "She's got her phone. She can call a cab or something." "There's no cell service up there." My voice cracked. "And no cabs run in weather like this." "Then I guess she'll have to walk." Victor shrugged his massive shoulders. "Stop being so dramatic. She'll be fine. A little cold never hurt anyone." I didn't waste another second on them. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and ran to my rental car, a sensible Honda CR-V with winter tires. As I tore out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. They were standing in the garage doorway, drinks in hand, watching me go with amused expressions. They had no idea what they'd set in motion. The drive up the mountain was a nightmare. Visibility was down to maybe 20 meters. Snow blasted horizontally across the road. My wipers could barely keep up. I drove hunched over the steering wheel, squinting into the white chaos, praying I wouldn't miss her in the storm. 15 minutes up the road, I found her. She was lying in a snowbank on the shoulder, not moving. I slammed on the brakes, fishtailed to a stop, and ran to her. My knee buckled, but I didn't care. She was wearing only her parka, no gloves, no hat. Marcus and Victor had taken them as a joke, she'd tell me later, to make it more sporting. Her face was pale blue. Her lips were purple. Her eyes were closed. "Emily! Emily, wake up!" I shook her, but she was limp, unresponsive. I checked for a pulse and found one, weak and slow. Severe hypothermia. I recognized it from the wilderness first aid course I'd taken years ago when we used to go camping as a family, back when my wife was still alive. I carried her to the car, laid her across the back seat, and cranked the heat to maximum. Then I turned around and drove like a man possessed back down the mountain. There was no cell service until I hit the highway. The moment I got a single bar, I pulled over and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance. My daughter has severe hypothermia. We're on Highway 1A, about 5 kilometers east of the Johnston Canyon turnoff." My voice was calm, mechanical. The panic had solidified into something else, something cold and hard. While I waited for the ambulance, I sat in the back seat with Emily's head in my lap, talking to her, begging her to hold on. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. I ran my hands over her arms and legs, trying to restore circulation, terrified of what the cold might have done to her extremities. Images flashed through my mind. Emily at 5 years old, building a snowman in our backyard in Edmonton. Emily at 18, valedictorian of her high school, speaking with such confidence about her future. Emily at her wedding 3 years ago, looking at Marcus with such hope, such love, that I bit my tongue and smiled and pretended I couldn't see the way his family looked at her like she was beneath them. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes. Paramedics swarmed around her, connecting monitors, wrapping her in thermal blankets, starting an IV. I heard fragments of their conversation. Core temp 32 degrees, frostbite on the fingers, possible respiratory complications. They loaded her into the ambulance, and I climbed in after her. I wasn't letting her out of my sight. The paramedic tried to object, but something in my expression made him reconsider. "Okay, sir, you can ride along. Just stay out of the way." As the ambulance began its journey to the hospital in Calgary, I pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady now. The cold had left my body and settled in my soul. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. James, my younger brother. We hadn't spoken in 8 years, not since the Christmas when I told him his methods were too extreme, his obsession with justice too dangerous. He'd been the best forensic investigator the RCMP had ever produced, but he didn't know when to stop. He destroyed his own career pursuing a case against a powerful mining company, a case his superiors ordered him to drop. He'd refused. They'd crushed him, forced retirement at 52, pension reduced, reputation shattered. He'd retreated to a cabin near Prince George, making ends meet with private investigation work, writing anonymous exposés under pen names. We'd fought bitterly about his choices. I thought he was throwing his life away. He thought I was a coward who'd rather keep peace than pursue truth. Now I understood. Now I needed exactly what I'd once condemned. I pressed call. It rang 4 times. I was sure he wouldn't answer. But then his voice came on the line, gruff and suspicious. "Yeah, who's this?" "James, it's Robert." A long pause. I could almost hear him straightening up, recalibrating. "Bobby. He hadn't called me that since we were kids. It's been a while." "I know. I'm sorry. But I need your help." "What happened?" I looked at Emily's pale face, the oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath, and felt something ancient and terrible stir in my chest. "They're heading back to Calgary right now, the Harringtons. They left Emily to die on a mountain road in a blizzard. They thought it was funny." Another pause. When James spoke again, his voice had changed. It was the voice I remembered from his RCMP days, clinical and focused. "Tell me everything." "Not now. When you get here." "But James," I lowered my voice to a whisper. "Do what you do best." I hung up without waiting for a response. The old life was over. The Robert Chen who avoided conflict, who smiled at insults, who swallowed his pride for the sake of family harmony. That man died on the mountain road where my daughter almost lost her life. Emily was admitted to the Foothills Medical Center in Calgary. Hypothermia, frostbite on 3 fingers. Early-stage pneumonia from inhaling ice crystals. The doctors said she was lucky. Another 30 minutes in that snow, and she would have lost her hands. Another hour, and she would have lost her life. I sat beside her bed all night, watching the monitors, listening to the rhythmic beeping that confirmed she was still alive. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat and planned. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Hey, hope Emily got home okay. Tell her we're sorry if she got scared. Just a bit of fun. See you at brunch tomorrow?" I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I typed a single word. "No." He tried calling. I declined. He texted again, this time more aggressive. "Come on, Robert. Don't be dramatic. She's fine, right? No harm done." I blocked his number. The next morning, Emily woke up. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened, and I took her hand, the one without the frostbite damage. "Dad?" Her voice was a whisper. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." She looked around the hospital room, taking in the IV lines, the monitors, the sterile white walls. Memory flooded back, and tears welled in her eyes. They just left me there. Marcus laughed and said I needed to toughen up. He took my gloves and hat. He said it would be funnier that way. I squeezed her hand. "I know, baby. I know." I called for help, but there was no signal. I tried to walk, but I got so tired. The snow was so deep, I thought. She broke down, sobbing. I thought I was going to die, Dad. I thought about Mom. I thought I was going to see her again. I held her while she cried, and in that moment, whatever restraint I had left dissolved completely. These people had nearly killed my daughter for sport. They'd treated her life as a punchline. And from their message, they didn't even understand what they'd done. They would understand soon. James arrived that afternoon. He looked older than I remembered, his hair gone completely gray, deep lines carved around his eyes. But those eyes were the same, sharp and analytical, missing nothing. We met in the hospital cafeteria, away from Emily's room. "I'm sorry," I said first, "for what I said 8 years ago. You were right. Sometimes the system doesn't work. Sometimes you have to go around it." James waved off the apology. "Ancient history. Tell me about the Harringtons." I told him everything. The years of subtle abuse, the constant belittling, the way they'd isolated Emily from her friends and family. And then the mountain, the blizzard, the deliberate cruelty, dressed up as a joke. James listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small leather notebook. "Victor Harrington," he said when I finished. "I know that name. He owns Harrington Resource Development, right? Oil and gas, some mining. Made his fortune in the boom years. That's him. I never liked the smell of that company." James tapped his pen against the notebook. "Too clean, too perfect. In my experience, when something looks that clean on the surface, there's rot underneath." "What are you thinking?" He looked at me with those predator's eyes. "I'm thinking that men like Victor don't start being cruel at 63. They start early and get better at hiding it. I'm thinking that if we dig deep enough, we'll find something worse than a bad joke on a mountain road." "How do we dig?" "Leave that to me." He stood up, tucking the notebook into his jacket. "Take care of Emily. Keep her away from them. And Bobby?" He paused. "Whatever I find, it might get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of my daughter's purple lips, her frozen fingers, the oxygen mask over her face. I'm prepared for anything. Over the next week, Emily recovered physically. Her fingers would heal with minimal scarring. Her lungs cleared, but the psychological damage ran deeper. She flinched at sudden sounds. She couldn't look at snow without trembling. And when Marcus's name appeared on her phone, she would stare at it with an expression I couldn't quite identify, somewhere between fear and dawning recognition. Marcus tried everything. Flowers delivered to the hospital, which I threw in the garbage. A tearful voicemail about how sorry he was, how it was his father's idea, how he never meant for things to go so far. Emily listened to it once, then deleted it without comment. Victor took a different approach. He sent a lawyer, a sleek, expensive lawyer in a $1,000 suit, who showed up at the hospital with papers and a practiced smile. "Mr. Chen, Mr. Harrington deeply regrets the unfortunate incident. He'd like to offer a settlement, a generous one, in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and dropping any potential charges." I looked at the number on the paper. 6 figures. Enough to buy a nice house in Edmonton. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mr. Chen, I really think you should consider." "Get out now." The lawyer left, but I knew this wouldn't end with one visit. Men like Victor Harrington didn't accept rejection. They escalated until they got what they wanted. It was the only language they understood. What they didn't understand was that I'd already escalated beyond anything they could match. James called me on the 8th day. "I found something," he said, without preamble. "Can you come to Calgary? I'm at the Sandman Hotel on McLeod Trail, room 412. I left Emily with a friend from Edmonton who'd driven down to help and went to meet my brother." The hotel room was covered in papers. James had turned it into a command center, with photographs and documents pinned to the walls, connected by colored strings like something from a crime drama. "Sit down," he said. "This is bigger than we thought." He handed me a coffee and began. 23 years ago, Victor Harrington had a business partner named Douglas Fenton. They co-owned a small exploration company, Fenton Harrington Resources. They were close friends, went to university together, built the business from nothing. What happened to him? Avalanche. James's voice was flat. February 1999. They were doing a site survey in the Kootenays, just the two of them. According to Victor's statement, Douglas triggered an avalanche while crossing a slope. Victor tried to dig him out, but couldn't. By the time search and rescue arrived, Douglas was dead. That sounds like an accident. It does, doesn't it? James pulled out a folder. But I tracked down the search and rescue volunteer who led the recovery team. He's retired now, lives in Revelstoke. He told me something interesting. Douglas wasn't found where Victor said he'd be. Victor said the avalanche buried him on the slope. But the body was found at the bottom of a cliff, 200 meters away from any slide activity. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He was pushed, the volunteer couldn't prove it. The official investigation was closed within a week. Victor inherited Douglas's share of the company. Within 5 years, it was worth $100 million. But there's more, isn't there? James nodded grimly. Douglas had a wife and a young son. The wife, Helen, tried to challenge Victor's takeover of the company. She hired a lawyer, started making noise about how the partnership agreement should have given her Douglas's shares. 3 months later, she died in a house fire. The boy went to foster care. The investigation ruled it an accident, a faulty space heater. I couldn't speak. The scope of what James was describing was monstrous. I found the son, James continued. His name is Nathan Fenton. He's 40 now, works as an electrician in Kamloops. He doesn't remember much about his parents, but he kept some of their belongings, including his father's journal from the months before the avalanche. James handed me a photocopy of a handwritten page. The writing was cramped and urgent. Victor is trying to force me out. He's been meeting with investors behind my back, promising them things we can't deliver. When I confronted him, he threatened me, said I'd regret causing problems. I've documented everything. If something happens to me, the truth needs to come out. Douglas knew, I whispered. He knew Victor was planning something. He knew. And he died before he could do anything about it. James sat down across from me, his eyes hard. Here's what we have, Bobby. We have Victor Harrington, a man who likely murdered his business partner and possibly his partner's widow, a man who built his entire fortune on blood. And 23 years later, he's still doing the same thing, using people as disposable objects, treating their lives as jokes. What do we do with this? We can't take it to the police. Not yet. It's too old, too circumstantial. Victor's got connections in every level of government. He's donated millions to political campaigns, university buildings, charity galas. He's untouchable through official channels. Then how? James smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. We go public. We tell the story. All of it. Douglas Fenton, Helen Fenton, and now Emily Chen. We show the pattern. And we let the court of public opinion do what the courts of law can't. That's what destroyed your career last time. Last time, I didn't have proof. I had suspicions and hearsay. This time, he held up a USB drive. This time, I have Douglas Fenton's journal, scanned and authenticated. I have testimony from the search and rescue volunteer, recorded with permission. I have financial records showing how Victor manipulated the partnership dissolution. I have photos of the settlement offer they made you, proving they know they're guilty. And I have Emily's medical records and your sworn statement about what happened on that mountain. When do we release it? I've already written the article. I've got contacts at the Globe and Mail, the CBC, and several investigative podcasts. They're ready to run it simultaneously. But I wanted your permission first. Once this goes out, there's no taking it back. The Harringtons will fight. They'll come after you, Emily. Me. It's going to be war. I thought about Emily's face when she woke up in that hospital bed. The fear, the betrayal, the dawning understanding that the man she married had tried to kill her for a laugh. Do it, I said. Burn them down. James nodded. It goes live tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'll be at a secure location. I suggest you take Emily somewhere safe. We said goodbye with a handshake that turned into a hug. 8 years of silence, and now we were brothers again, united against a common enemy. I went back to Emily's room and found her sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had all week. Dad, she said as I walked in, I've decided something. What's that, sweetheart? I'm filing for divorce, and I'm pressing charges. Assault, reckless endangerment, whatever sticks. I don't care if it makes headlines. I don't care if it embarrasses me. They need to face consequences. I sat down beside her and took her hand. I'm proud of you. And you should know, Consequences are already coming, bigger than you might expect. What do you mean? I told her about James, about Douglas Fenton, about everything. She listened with widening eyes, her face cycling through shock, horror, and finally a cold, grim satisfaction. They killed people, she whispered. Victor killed people, and Marcus. Marcus knew, didn't he? All those jokes about his father being ruthless in business, he knew. Probably. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was strength. Good, she said. Let them burn. The story broke at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning. By noon, it was the biggest news story in Canada. Oil tycoon linked to decades-old murders, screamed the headline. The CBC ran a special segment. Twitter exploded. The hashtag number Justice for Douglas started trending within hours. I didn't see the Harringtons' reaction directly, but James had sources everywhere. He called me with updates throughout the day. Victor's in full damage control mode. He's called every contact he has, trying to get the story killed. But it's too late. It's everywhere. What about Marcus? Panicking. He's apparently screaming at his lawyers, demanding they sue everyone involved. They're trying to explain that you can't sue for defamation when the story is true. By evening, the story had grown. Other victims came forward. Former employees who'd been threatened or silenced. Contractors who'd been cheated. A woman who claimed Victor had assaulted her at a company party 30 years ago and paid her to disappear. The dam had broken, and decades of buried sins came flooding out. The next day, the RCMP announced they were reopening the investigations into Douglas and Helen Fenton's deaths. The day after that, Victor Harrington was arrested. I watched the footage on the news. Victor in handcuffs, being led out of his Calgary mansion, his face a mask of disbelief. He'd spent his entire life believing he was untouchable, and now he was being touched very firmly by two uniformed officers. Marcus was arrested separately, not for the historical crimes, but for his role in what happened to Emily. Criminal negligence causing bodily harm. Assault. Leaving the scene of an emergency. The charges wouldn't carry the same weight as murder, but they'd be enough. Emily watched the arrests from her hospital room. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just watched with quiet, exhausted relief. "Is it over?" she asked. "Not yet," I said honestly. "There'll be trials, lawyers, probably years of legal battles, but the hardest part is done. The truth is out. They can't bury it again." She nodded slowly. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me, for fighting when I couldn't. You're my daughter. I'd fight the whole world for you." She started crying then, and I held her, and we sat together in that hospital room while the news played footage of the Harrington empire collapsing in real time. 1 month later, Emily was discharged from the hospital. Her fingers had healed well, though the doctors said she might have some sensitivity to cold for the rest of her life. The pneumonia was gone, and her strength had returned. But more importantly, something had changed in her spirit. The desperate need to please, the constant anxiety, the fear of causing trouble, it was all gone, replaced by a quiet determination I recognized from her mother. I drove her home to Edmonton, not to the Harrington mansion in Calgary, not to the ski chalet in the mountains, but to my small house near the university where she'd grown up. Her old bedroom was waiting for her, unchanged since she'd left for university 15 years ago. "I can't stay here forever," she said as we pulled into the driveway. "Stay as long as you need. There's no rush." We spent that first week doing ordinary things, cooking meals together, watching terrible movies, taking walks in the river valley. We didn't talk much about the Harringtons or the trial or what came next. We just existed, peacefully, in the eye of the storm. James visited on the weekend. He looked different too, lighter somehow, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. "The Crown prosecutor says the case against Victor is strong," he reported. "Multiple witnesses, documentary evidence, and now that people aren't afraid to talk, more testimony coming in every day. Nathan Fenton is cooperating. He wants justice for his parents, even if it's 23 years late." "What about Marcus?" Emily asked. "He's trying to cut a deal, testifying against his father in exchange for reduced charges. Apparently, family loyalty only goes so far when prison time is involved. Emily nodded but didn't comment. The divorce papers had been filed. She wanted nothing from the marriage, not money, not property, not even an apology. She just wanted it over. As James was leaving, he pulled me aside. "You know, Bobby, I spent 8 years in that cabin, angry at the world, angry at you, angry at everyone who didn't care enough to fight. But watching you this past month, I realized I was wrong about something." "What's that?" "I thought the fight was about winning, about destroying the bad guys. But it's not, is it? It's about protecting the people you love. That's what I forgot." I thought about that for a long time after he left. On a Sunday afternoon in early spring, Emily and I went for a walk in the river valley. The snow was finally melting, and the first hints of green were appearing in the trees. She walked with her hands in her pockets, her face tilted toward the weak sunshine. "I've made a decision," she said. "Another one?" She smiled, and it was a real smile, the first one I'd seen in months that reached her eyes. "I'm going to go back to school, get my teaching certificate. I always wanted to teach, remember? Before I met Marcus, before I decided that his dreams were more important than mine. I remember. You wanted to teach elementary school. You said you wanted to help kids discover that learning could be fun." "I did say that." She laughed, a small sound but genuine. "I think I forgot who I was for a while. Let myself become what they wanted me to be. But not anymore." We walked in comfortable silence for a while. The river was high with snowmelt, rushing and tumbling over rocks. A pair of Canada geese floated past, unconcerned with human drama. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything. For not giving up. For calling Uncle James. For fighting when I couldn't fight for myself." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "Emily, listen to me. I made a lot of mistakes over the years. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I smiled at people who didn't deserve my courtesy. I told myself that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth. And I was wrong. I should have fought for you sooner. I should have seen what they were doing and stopped it before it got to that mountain road. You couldn't have known. Maybe not. But I knew they were cruel. I knew they didn't respect you. And I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause problems." I shook my head. "That ends now. No more silence. No more swallowing poison to keep the peace. If someone tries to hurt you, tries to hurt anyone I love, I will fight with everything I have." Emily hugged me then, right there on the river trail, and for a long moment we just stood there. Father and daughter, survivors of something terrible, looking towards something better. The trials went on for 2 years. Victor was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He died of a heart attack 8 months into his sentence, alone in a prison cell, surrounded by people who didn't fear him at all. Marcus received 5 years for his role in the mountain incident. He served 3 with good behavior and emerged a broken man, his fortune gone, his reputation destroyed, unable to find work or rebuild the life of privilege he'd once taken for granted. I heard he moved to the States eventually, trying to escape the infamy. I didn't follow up. He wasn't worth the attention. Nathan Fenton got a portion of the Harrington estate, compensation for what had been stolen from his family. He used it to set up a scholarship fund in his parents' names, helping young people from difficult backgrounds pursue education. I met him once, at a memorial event for Douglas and Helen. He shook my hand and thanked me, though I told him the thanks belonged to James. James wrote a book about the case. It became a bestseller. He donated the profits to victims' advocacy organizations and returned to investigative journalism, this time with the support and resources to do it right. We talk every week now. We never let 8 years pass in silence again. And Emily? Emily finished her teaching degree at the top of her class. She teaches grade 4, now at a school in Street Albert, not far from my house. She comes over for dinner every Sunday. Sometimes she brings friends, fellow teachers, or classmates. Sometimes she comes alone, and we play cards, or watch hockey, or just sit in comfortable silence. She's dating someone new, a quiet man named David who works in conservation. He's kind and thoughtful, and when they're together, Emily laughs the way she used to laugh before the Harringtons poisoned her joy. I don't know if they'll last, but I know he treats her with respect. That's all I ask. I'm 67 now. My knee still bothers me when the weather changes. I volunteer at the public library twice a week and take evening classes in creative writing at the university. I'm writing my own story, not for publication, but for Emily, for my grandchildren, if I'm lucky enough to have them, a record of what happened and why, so they'll understand that fighting for the people you love is never wrong. Sometimes I think about that night on the mountain, the terror of finding Emily in the snow, the helpless rage of watching the Harringtons laugh as they drove away. The moment I pressed call on James's number and committed myself to a path I couldn't turn back from. I used to believe that revenge was wrong, that forgiveness was always the higher road. I don't believe that anymore. What I did wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was protecting my daughter from people who saw her as disposable. It was refusing to let evil hide behind wealth and respectability. The Harringtons thought they were untouchable. They thought their money and connections made them gods, free to destroy lives without consequence. They thought wrong. They pushed my daughter into the snow and left her to die. But they didn't know my brother. This concludes the story of Robert Chen, a story about quiet strength, a father's love, and the truth that sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or laws, but from ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. What do you think? Did Robert make the right choice? Could he have handled things differently, trusting a system that had already failed so many of Victor's victims? Or was this the only path, the only way to protect his daughter and honor the memory of those who died in silence? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Perhaps you have questions about what happened to some of the characters. What do you think the future holds for Emily? Will Nathan Fenton find peace knowing his parents' killer faced justice? And what about James, the brother who came back from exile to fight one more battle? Write everything in the comments below. Let's discuss this story together. If this story touched you, please support our channel. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and share your opinion. Your feedback and participation are the best reward for us, and what allows us to continue creating new, equally captivating stories for you. Did you like my story? And which province or territory are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, you can support us by sending a super thanks so we can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your kind support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.